how lovely to see you. And it's a full house, which is lovely, and a great compliment to Sally, of course. This is a very auspicious day, because this is the first day of the first ever McLellan Book Festival. And this is the very first event. So welcome everyone, and of course a special welcome to Sally Magnusson, such a Ken Speckle figure to us all. Your recent book, Music in the Dark, is a clearances novel. So can I ask you, Sally, what was it that drew you to write a novel about the clearances?
After my book, The Ninth Child, had been published, that was my second novel, and my publisher, they're based in London, but she liked the idea of me doing another piece of Scottish historical fiction, and asked me if there was any area of Scottish history that I would be interested in writing about. And I thought about the massacre of the Rossies. I thought I must find out more about that. Yeah. And then I became completely sort of intrigued by the story of what had happened, and the idea that was entirely new to me at the time, which was that women were to the forefront in resistance to clearance. So I followed through on that, and then as I began to develop the story, I'm always interested not just in the dramatic kind of kernel of a story, but in what happened after. Yes. And so I began to think about what would have happened to these women who were left really for dead on the field of Green Yards, as it was called, this township, with their heads beaten in. What would happen to the ones who survived for the next few decades? What would happen to their minds? What would happen to the way they lived their lives after an experience like that? And I thought about my great-grandmother, who was cleared from the Isle of Mull around the same time, actually. Maybe about 10 years later, 1863, I think she came to Glasgow. And she had a story which I've always had also at the back of my mind and wanted to tell about, arriving in Glasgow, having to live in tremendous urban squalor as mid-19th century Glasgow was for the working classes, and especially for the migrant Highlanders who were coming down without jobs and homes. And so I sort of spliced these two stories together, her story and the historical story of the clearances in Strathcarron. And somehow out of that potpourri came Music in the Dark. That night she gazed on him with a kind of awe as he slept. After all the misgivings and insecurities, what she had not accounted for, not for 1 minute prepared herself for, was what it felt like to have him close. The particular pleasure of hearing the breath of another living being who was not Willie Bain competing with her own, now slower, now faster, and feeling the vibrations of another chest rising and falling, as if, and here was the revelation, as if life could be born, the piling griefs of it, the disappointments and confusions of it, as long as this chest continued to rise and fall at her side. Add this then to the scales, not Paul's scales, or was it Saul? Not Zeus's scales, weighing out godly portions of death, just the ones Mr. Pinkerton has for weighing out tea. Marriage scales. A brass weight on one side for having to put up with the heaving about on nights you're not in the mood for worship. This to include the general nuisance of not being able to claim some peace in your own bed whenever you feel like it, or help sleep on its way with a mouthful of something that's no business of his. My great-grandmother had a tipple or two as well.
My question is, do you enjoy reading your own book?
It's an interesting question. It kind of depends when. You know, there's a stage when you're writing it where you've read it so often because you've got to revise it and improve it and change it around and respond to so-and-so's notes and somebody else's notes, and you never want to read it ever again. And then there's a stage later when you read it and think, oh my goodness, I could have written this so much better, and why did I do that? And oh, I can't bear this, and just can't read it at all. And then there's another stage where you read it with some sort of surprise and delight that actually, do you know what, it's not bad. But that takes a while to get to.
How does your experience so far, we've only been here for half a day, how does your experience of McLellan Book Festival compare with others that you've been to across the country and in England?
It compares very, very highly, I have to say. The kindness, the consideration of every person involved in the book festival has been overwhelming. I've been looked after so well.
Alex, you've spent your whole life in Glasgow. You were telling me that you wanted to write from the age of 8. So it's not really surprising that you write about Glasgow and its people with such convincing reality. Do you base most of your characters on people that you've met and during your varied career?
I'm actually not very sure. I think Maggie Lorimer is my main detective. His wife Maggie, I think she's pretty much based physically on my best pal with whom I went through teacher's training, my pal Val. Val was slim, still is very slim, used to have long dark hair like Maggie. It's white now. She's not here. But an awful lot of Maggie is me, definitely. And this actually really happened to me. So in this bit, I am Maggie. Maggie clambered up the rope ladder hand over hand till she reached a wooden step leading into their treetop bedroom. Inside, she could see a large mosquito net suspended above a double bed. On each side was a small cabinet with a single lamp, their lights attracting a variety of pale grey moths. The windows were simply gaps in the wooden structure, covered by makeshift cotton curtains suspended on rods. "Here, take that far side," her husband insisted, crouching behind her. "If anything clambers up during the night, it'll have me for starters," he chuckled. Maggie stood still for a moment. "Surely nothing can climb up here," she began. "Leopards climb trees," Lorimer reminded her, "but there's an electric fence all the way round, so we'll be quite safe, darling." Maggie slipped into her cotton nightdress, flicked off the nightlight, and slid as quickly as she could under the mosquito net, gathering it securely. It was so dark, she realised, darker than anywhere she had ever been before. Outside, the night noises grew louder, the repetitive sounds a sign of the nocturnal world come to life. Eventually, sleep took her, the rhythmic sounds of croaking frogs lulling her senses. She was dreaming of being tossed by the storm, the boat moving under her feet, waves lashing against its wooden hull. Suddenly, Maggie sat up. What was that thumping? And why was their tree being shaken from side to side? The noises outside had ceased, a sign of danger perhaps, small creatures hiding from a predator. A sound like a heavy footfall by her bed made Maggie want to cry out. Heart thudding, she reached out a shaking hand and fumbled for the light switch. Whatever dangerous beast was inside their tiny cabin, she wanted to see it. There, its tail wound around the stem of the lamp, a small creature with huge eyes stared at Maggie. For a moment, both human and animal froze in terror before it scampered into the thatch above her and disappeared into the night. A bush baby, Maggie grinned at her own fright. Poor wee thing had been far more terrified of this intruder into its nighttime world than she was of their unexpected visitor. She lay back again, sensing that the tree house was motionless once more, realising the cacophony of cicadas had resumed. What a story to tell when Bill woke up. She thought about rousing him, but his soft snores reminded her of how exhausted he had looked before their holiday. She hugged the incident to herself, already playing it over in her mind. The darkness held no danger for them after all. Perhaps those other sounds had just been part of her dream.
The two novels we are focusing on this afternoon are The Fair Botanist, set in Edinburgh in the 1820s, and The Secrets of Blytheswood Square, which takes place initially in Edinburgh, but primarily in Glasgow in the mid-19th century. So I was wondering, Sara, what it is about this period that particularly appeals to you?
I just seem to be drawn to it. I think there are a number of reasons. It's about 1820 to about 1850, and I will walk through a museum and I will pick out those pieces. I'll be drawn to those display cases, and for ages I was trying to figure out why that was. I think it might be the rise of the British Empire. I think it might be that segue from the Georgian into the Victorian, that so much of our British culture today is still holds that time, still identifies with that time. And in that sense, it's really part of where our culture comes from. So I think that's what really does it for me. And I also have a thing for the 1950s. Interestingly, I wrote a 9-book series of cosy crime stories, which are set in the 1950s. And I think my fascination with that period is that's the other end of that arc. Britain comes out of India, Britain withdraws from Palestine, and there's just this descent of the British Empire, and so it's kind of bookends that. And so again, I'll go through a museum, be absolutely drawn to the 1950s. One of her gentleman admirers comes to call on her about this, and this is the exchange. While Glasgow mostly sleeps, Grace Sutherland entertains late. She does not finish at the theatre till 10 after all, and glories in lighting her rooms as bright as the star she wants to be. Tonight she dines on a slab of veal that would feed a family for a week and a bottle of claret to wash it down. Then she turns her attention to the 3 missives sitting on a salver on her desk, each branded with a different seal. These are the bids for her calotype. She's about to set herself to opening them when Berry knocks. "Miss Sutherland, Mr. McIntyre is at the door," she says, casting her eyes upwards, for Miss Sutherland's gentlemen are considered trying by her staff. They make a joke of it. Donald McIntyre submitted one of the 3 envelopes with which Grace is toying. His is of thick cream paper branded with his family crest, a hand clasped round a sword in green wax. Grace lifts it between elegant fingers and consults the elaborate Clisson clock on the mantel. It is almost midnight. "I can't imagine what he wants," she says, her gaze shifting to her reflection in the mirror. "Send him up." Donald is almost 50 years of age and married to his second cousin. He is a large bear of a fellow with a tightly trimmed beard, and tonight is wearing a flamboyant evening dress with purple satin tie, his cloak lined in a matching shade. He has taken drink, she notes, immediately apparent as he bursts into her chamber. "Grace," he hails her, "I've been thinking." Thinking, Grace notes dryly, is not Donald McIntyre's strong point. However, she does not say this out loud. "What have you been thinking?" she asks coyly. "About that image of you. Indeed. Is it the only one? I mean, are there more, Grace?" He flings himself into a chair beside the fire. Grace pours a whiskey the way she knows he prefers, with only a little water to open the flavour. "There are more," she coos. "Not the same, mind. Different." He grunts as if to say that he knew it. "I don't mind being extorted," he says, taking a sip, "but I'd like to be comprehensively extorted if that's what it comes to." Grace perches prettily on the opposite chair, far enough away that he cannot lay his hands on her. "I don't know what you mean," she says. "If you wish to withdraw your bid, I can return it." She removes the McIntyre envelope from her décolletage, feeling satisfied that Donald lets out an involuntary gasp as she does so. He does not snatch the paper, however. "I merely seek to clarify, not to withdraw, Grace," he says. Grace sighs. "Clarify what? That you're selling not one image, but that you have more." "Yes. How many?" Grace chose 3 of Ellery's prints. She decides to admit it. 3, she says. "And you intend to auction the others?" "In time, of course." "I want to up my bid. I want to buy the lot, to take you off the market picture-wise, do you see," Donald says, looking pleased with himself. Grace gets up and takes a turn around her chair. She leans over the back of it. "Oh, Donald," she says with great seriousness, "that would cost a lot of money."
Mór an tang agus hamise ó bhabhasach tóirte bhí seo an dú an tír an árain. Ó bhabhasach tóirte, fesgur mágaibh. Now you'll be relieved to know that the rest of this will be in English. The point of starting with a few words of the mighty language of the Gael is that to say something very simple, and that's that the Gaeltacht is different. It is not the rest of Scotland. It's not the Lowlands. It's not somewhere which is homogeneous with the rest of Scotland. And there are lots of reasons for that, and I'm going to explore those as we go on. There are many Scotlands, of course. There are probably many Gaeltachts as well. But nevertheless, the language, in my view, is one of the most important points of difference. And Gaelic is also a key in another way. It's a key to understanding the North. And this was forcibly in front of me 30 years ago. Heather mentioned that I was director of programmes at Scottish Television. And in 1989, to our astonishment, Margaret Thatcher took an interest in Gaelic. What? She promised £8 million as part of the Gaelic Television Fund to fund the production of TV programmes in Gaelic. And 2 half hours every week were to be scheduled in peak time. And half of my board of directors fainted. And I thought, oh dear, there's a wee problem here. And the wee problem was a legal one. As editor-in-chief of STV, I was legally liable for our output. And if I didn't understand what they were saying, that could be it was no defence, I suspect, at the High Court in Edinburgh that I didn't understand, sir. So I went on a 6-week immersion course at Solmorosteik in Skye to learn the language double quick. But I soon found that actually it was important, it was a key. And I found that when I went to see Father Callum McLellan, who's the parish priest on Barra. And in the bar were half a dozen fishermen who'd obviously been out all night after lobster and crab and so on. And they're wearing these great orange sort of dungarees with the big straps over their shoulders and their sea boots. And they're all at the bar at 9 o'clock in the morning, having been out all night. And I walked in, and on islands like that, I guess Arran is just the larger version, on islands like that, everybody knows everything before it happens. And I walked in the door, and one of the fishermen looked up and he said, "Ah, you're from the television." And I amazed him by replying in Gaelic. And there was a hush and a pause. "Ah," he said, "you'll have a dram." I said, "It's 9 o'clock in the morning." "Okay, a soft drink, a beer." I said, "No, I'm fine. I want to use the telephone." This was before mobiles. "Ah," he said, "I'll show you where it is. It's in the gents' toilet." Why not? And so he showed me where it was, and while he was there, he availed himself of the facilities. And he was trying to peel off this great orange thing, with the straps, and he said, "As I say to my wife, it's a lot easier to find when there's 2 of you looking." Gee whiz, I've definitely arrived at somewhere different. I thought, absolutely somewhere different. For 7 or 8 years, between the early 1980s and the early 90s, we stayed for a week in the late autumn with a group of friends from London in an old hunting lodge on the southern shore of Loch Sunart. Built in the 19th century when sporting estates were further emptying the landscape of Morvern, the accommodation was very basic, even Spartan, but there was a large sitting room with old sofas and armchairs to sink into, and a vast fireplace that could burn and crackle logs that were 2 feet long. The other warm room was the kitchen and its dining room with an oil-fired aga and a Rayburn to heat the water. One of the London couples were vegetarians, something much less common then, and they did all the dinners and lunches, which amazed us all. They were so delicious and inventive. Non-veggies were, however, catered for by my sausage, bacon, black pudding and fried egg breakfasts. Always an early riser, I was happy to be up and doing in the early dark to wash up the night before's clutter and get everything ready for the first bleary-eyed stumbler out of bed. That routine was memorable. It gave me time to make some good coffee and pull on a warm coat and go outside in the half-light, a magical time. In front of the hunting lodge was a long grass paddock stretching down to the loch shore. Crunching over the gravel with my steaming mug, I liked to listen to the silence, breathe in the cold, clean air, and wait for the dawn to wash over the Ardnamurchan mountains. And when the morning sky was clear, I'd see the pale yellow light catch the tip of Ben Resipol and wash down its flanks. But the dawn I remember more than any other, like a tiny splash of sunshine in the dark mists of the past, was overcast, the gunmetal sky heavy with scudding clouds. Sipping my coffee, I leaned on an old cast-iron fence and looked down the sloping paddock. It was difficult to be sure at first, but I thought I could make out movement by the loch side, shapes darker than the faint glimmer on the water. And then, in a startling moment, I knew what I was peering at. A red deer stag suddenly roared. It was a deep, echoic, throaty bellow. Around him his hinds were grazing, and somewhere in the distance other stags heard his warning. I must have watched and listened for some time, for when I looked over to the mountains, I saw the peak of Ben Resipol lit by the butter-coloured rays of the morning sun as it pierced the fleeing clouds. Dawn seemed to light the land quickly, edging closer, the 100 colours of the highlands beginning to glow. The stag raised up his head and roared again as a new day broke and the old land came alive once more. These were moments I've never forgotten. Thank you very much.